Red light, a hard flat scream of sound. My hands were still wet from the sink. Water ran down my wrists and onto the floor, and I remember staring at it like it mattered, like the water was a thing I could hold on to. Missile lock, all hands battle stations. This is not a drill. The captain's voice came through the speaker like he was ordering coffee. Richard Fry never raised his voice. He was raising it now, but only a little. And that was worse than a scream. My name is Daniel Carter, Fleet Trauma Surgeon, 16 years in the Medical Corps. And I had never heard those words on this ship, not once. The Hippocrates was a hospital. We did not get missile locks. Nobody aimed missiles at hospitals. That was the oldest rule in the galaxy, older than most of the species who had signed it. I looked up and saw Margaret Hill in the doorway of the surgical bay. And GT snorts. And GT. She was my chief surgeon and the closest thing I had to a second mother. Her gray hair was pinned back tight. Her eyes were the coldest thing in the room. Daniel, she said, move the boy now. My patient was a child, 6 years old, from a species called the Vorn, green-skinned and small-boned. His father had begged us to save him. We were halfway through an operation on his belly. I had his life in my hands in the most literal way a surgeon ever does. Margaret, if I stop now, he doesn't wake up. If you don't stop now, none of us wakes up. The armored bay go. We rolled the table into the corridor. The lights flickered overhead. I could feel the ship's engine straining under my feet. The deep vibration of a big thing trying to turn fast when it was not built to turn fast. Somewhere above us, I heard a sound like a heavy door being slammed shut over and over, and I realized it was our point defense guns. Firing at what? We passed Nurse Kessie in the hallway. She was four-armed and reptile-skinned, and she loved human jazz music for reasons none of us ever figured out. She was carrying 2 children under each set of arms, moving them toward the crash shelter. Daniel, she said as we passed, and she smiled at me like she did every morning. Breathe, just breathe. That was the last time I saw her alive. The armored surgical bay was the safest room on the ship. 12 cm hull plate, its own air supply, its own power. It had been built because someone somewhere had once imagined a day like this and had been laughed at for imagining it. Nobody was laughing now. Margaret sealed the door behind us. The locks engaged with a sound like a heart closing. I laid my hands back on the boy, found the bleeder I had been chasing, and kept working. Status, Margaret said into the intercom. The voice that came back was Laura Dean. From the bridge, she was the ship's communications officer, 24 years old, and she had a boy at home. She showed us pictures of every day. Chief, we have 9 Cathar cruisers on our stern. They decloaked 10 seconds ago. They have not hailed us. They have to hail us, Margaret said. That is the treaty. They have to hail us before they fire. They are firing, Chief. Margaret looked at me across the boys' open chest. I have never seen a face go so empty so fast. The first impact hit. The ship kicked sideways so hard my knees buckled, but my hands stayed where they were. That is what they train you for. That is the whole of surgical training. Your feet can die, your heart can stop, your hands keep moving. I closed the bleeder. I got the clamps in. The boy's heart kept going, weak but going, and I bent over him and breathed in and breathed out and tried to pretend that the world was not ending outside the door. Daniel. I looked up. Margaret was at the monitor, the internal camera feed. Don't, I said. Daniel, you need to see this. Don't, Margaret. But my eyes went to the screen anyway. Because that is what eyes do. The crash corridor was on fire. Not a metaphor, actual fire, the kind that spreads through a ship only when the hull has opened somewhere it should not have opened. I saw small shapes running, and I saw bigger shapes falling on top of them to cover them, and I understood that the bigger shapes were our nurses. I saw Kessie. She was not running anymore. She was lying across a Vorn child like a shield, and she was not moving. The child was moving. The child was alive. Kessie was not. I think I made a sound. I do not remember what it was. Then the feed cut to the main corridor, and I saw Dr. Aaron. He was my best friend. He was from an avian species, tall and thin with feathers the color of old copper, and we had gotten drunk together on 3 different moons. He was standing in the middle of the corridor unarmed, both wings spread wide. I read lips across species better than most, and I could see what he was saying. He was saying over and over, we are healers, we are unarmed, there are children here, we are healers. The Cathar soldier at the end of the corridor did not pause. I closed my eyes. I did not open them for a long time. When I opened them again, Margaret's hand was on my shoulder. Daniel. I know. Daniel, we have to move. I know. The captain's voice came through the intercom one more time. Richard Fry, who never raised his voice. This time it was quiet because there was no more reason to be calm. All surviving medical staff, escape pod. Bay 6, now the data core goes with you. This is your captain. This is your last order from me. I looked at the boy on my table. His heart was still going. If I left him, he would not live. If I stayed with him, neither would I, neither would Margaret. Neither would the 3 children she was already pulling out of the emergency locker at the back of the bay. 3 children I had not even known were in there. Margaret looked at me. I looked at the boy. Daniel, she said, you are not God. You are a doctor. We take the ones we can take. I lifted my hands off his chest. I will carry that moment with me until I die. The lifting of my hands. We ran for the escape pod. The corridors were red with emergency light and red with other things I will not describe. Margaret led. I followed with 2 of the children in my arms. A junior nurse named George Fisher had the 3rd. The 4th, the Vorn boy, stayed on the table behind us. I did not look back. The escape pod door hissed open, and then the ship screamed around us one last time, and then we were gone. We drifted for 3 days. We did not speak much. The children cried, and we held them, and we counted the hours until somebody found us, or until our air ran out, whichever came first. I kept thinking about Aaron's spread wings. I kept thinking about Kessie's last smile. I kept thinking about the Vorn boy on the table and the weight of my own hands lifting away from him. On the 3rd day, a Terran destroyer pulled us out of the dark. They told us the final count later. 3,114 people had lived on the Hippocrates. 612 of them had been healers. 197 of them had been children. None of them had been armed. And the Cathar ascendancy had broadcast the whole thing live on every channel, conquered space so that every species in the galaxy could watch us die. The hatch of the escape pod opened and I forgot how to stand. A Terran soldier leaned in, young, broad-shouldered, a boy younger than any of my children would have been if I had ever had children. He looked at us and his face did the thing that faces do when they are trying not to break. "You are safe," he said. "You are safe now." I did not believe him. I have never believed those words since. They took us to a medical frigate called the Compassion. They gave us blankets. They gave us hot drinks none of us could taste. They tried to separate me from the 3 children, and I would not let them, and nobody had the stomach to fight me on it. Margaret Hill did not cry. Margaret Hill did not sleep. Margaret Hill sat in a chair by the observation window for 9 hours straight and stared at the stars, like she was looking for someone in them. On the second day, they brought us the final count, and I have already told you the count, and I do not want to write it again. On the third day, the Concord Council called an emergency session, and they asked me to come. I went. I sat in the witness chamber. I was still wearing borrowed clothes. My hands still shook when I held a cup of water. The council chamber was the most impressive room in the known galaxy. 200 species sat in concentric rings around a central floor. Some of those species had been starfaring when humans were still painting on cave walls. They had seen atrocities before. They had seen massacres before. They had, each of them, in their long histories, survived something. One by one they stood up and they said the same thing in different words. The elder Drell said the attack was regrettable and that sanctions should be considered. The Vorth, who are ancient and slow to speak, said that a formal condemnation should be drafted. The Mian said that the treaty should be reviewed and perhaps amended. They had done this before. They had learned over thousands of years that when a predator species does a thing like this, the best answer is a measured one. Strong words, trade restrictions, patience. They had learned this because most of them were too old to bleed anymore, and because the Kael'thar ascendancy had done this kind of thing to each of them at some point, and each of them had survived by bending. They expected humans to bend. We were the new species. We were the young species. We were the emotional species, the small species, the species who cried at our own weddings. They thought we would weep and they would pat our shoulders and the galaxy would go on. The human ambassador sat through every speech without saying a word. Her name was Catherine Blake. She was 54 years old. She wore a plain black suit, and her hair pulled back tight, and she kept her hands folded in her lap for 6 hours straight, and she did not blink once that I could see. When her turn came, she did not use the podium. She stood up at her seat. She looked around the chamber slowly, and she met the eyes of every ambassador who had spoken before her, 200 of them. She met every single one, and her face did not move. Then she said 4 words. "You struck our healers." That was all. She sat down. She did not sit down long. She stood back up, picked up her folder, and walked out of the chamber. Her aides followed her. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Within the hour, every human diplomatic channel in the galaxy went dark. Every embassy, every consulate, every trade office, every public human voice, everywhere stopped speaking. Within 6 hours, the Terran fleet vanished from Concord tracking systems, not retreated, not redeployed. Vanished. tracking satellites that had watched human ships for 100 years, saw empty space where ships had been the day before. The older species began to understand, slowly, that they had been wrong about us. I understood it faster because I was human and because I had been on the Hippocrates. I went to the liaison officer on the Compassion. His name was Peter Hart. Soldier captain with a square jaw and tired eyes. He had been assigned to debrief me and arrange my testimony for the tribunal. I sat down across from him. I am not testifying, I said. He blinked. Sir, the tribunal needs eyewitness. I am not testifying. I am asking for a transfer. A transfer where? To a combat assignment. There was a long silence. Peter Hart looked at me the way a man looks at a piece of equipment he has never seen, used in a way he did not expect. Dr. Carter, he said carefully, you are a surgeon. I am aware of what I am, Captain Hart. Surgeons do not go on combat assignments. This one does. Another silence. He tapped his fingers on the table. I did not blink. I will need to make some calls, he said. He made the calls. 3 days later, I was on a Terran destroyer called the Resolute, and I was doing push-ups on a gymnasium floor next to soldiers half my age, and nobody was laughing at me because nobody felt like laughing about anything anymore. I was not the only doctor who had done this. I learned slowly that 84 surviving medical personnel from the Hippocrates had made the same request, every single one of us. Old surgeons, nurses, lab techs, pharmacists, every one of us had walked into a liaison office and asked for combat. None of us were refused. I learned later that the Terran command had been expecting it. Margaret Hill did not request combat. Margaret Hill requested something else. She requested to command a hospital ship. Again, she told them she was too old to hold a weapon, but not too old to hold a scalpel, and if the galaxy was going to have healers in it, she was going to be one of them until she died. They gave her what she asked for. They built her a new ship. They built it vast. On the 21st day after the attack, I stood on the observation deck of the Resolute and watched something I had never seen before. A Terran fleet assembled. Not a task force, not a patrol group. Fleet. Ships came out of Jump 1 after another. For 6 hours, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, new ships fresh from the yards, their hulls still smelling of paint, old ships dragged out of retirement, their plating scarred from wars older than me, civilian ships converted in weeks, their cargo bays stripped and filled with missiles. By the end of the day, there were more human warships in one system than they conquered had seen together in 100 years. And none of them had flags. None of them had names. Every ship had been stripped of its identifiers, every paint marking, every registry number, every pennant gone. In their place, painted on each hull, thick red strokes, was one symbol. A red cross, turned upside down, dragged across the hull like a wound. That would not close. I stood on the observation deck with Captain Hart beside me, and I said quietly, "What does it mean?" He looked at me. He had not smiled once since I had met him. "It means we are not healers today, Dr. Carter," he said. "It means they made us something else." Then Admiral Helen Shaw came aboard. Admiral Shaw was small. That was the first thing people always said about her. She was 5 feet and 2 inches tall. and she had white hair cut short in her uniform fit her like a uniform has fit. Exactly one person in the history of every army. She was 61 years old. She had commanded ships in 3 small wars before this, and she had lost her husband in the second one. She walked onto the bridge of the Resolute. We all stood up. She waved us back down. She did not give a long speech. She said, and I remember every word, "We are no longer a species that asks for mercy. We are the answer to those who refuse to give it. We will not speak. We will not threaten. We will arrive, and then we will leave, and the quiet behind us will say everything that needs to be said. If any of you cannot do this, step off the ship now. No one will think less of you. We will need healers again when this is done." Nobody stepped off. She nodded once. She turned to the helm officer, a young woman named Laura Dean, who had transferred from the Compassion, who had been Captain Fry's communications officer on the Hippocrates, who had lost more friends in one afternoon than most people lose in a lifetime. Helm Admiral Shaw said, "Take us out." Laura Dean said, "Yes, ma'am." The fleet moved. The Kael'thar Ascendancy at that moment had no idea we were coming. They had been watching the Concord Council debate sanctions for 3 weeks. They had watched Catherine Blake walk out of the chamber without another word. They had watched human diplomatic channels go silent, and they had read the silence as surrender. They had read it as fear. They were about to learn to read it differently. The first target was a Kael'thar forward base in the Vexar Reach, and it took us 47 minutes to turn it into nothing at all. I was in the medical bay of the Resolute when the engagement started. I had trained for 3 weeks. I had learned to carry a rifle, to strip and clean it, to put it back together with my eyes closed. I had learned how to breathe through a boarding helmet. I had learned to run in the armor without falling. But on the first engagement, I was in medical. That is where they needed me. First, the Kael'thar base was called Vester. It had 3,000 military personnel and 12 warships in dock. It had never in its 40 years of operation been attacked. It sat in a quiet corner of space, and it watched. It was where the attack on the Hippocrates had been coordinated from. We knew this because we had spent the 3 weeks of our silence learning it. The first warning the Kael'thar received was the shadow of our lead cruiser passing across their sensors. The second warning was when that cruiser began to fire. There was no third warning. I listened through the medical intercom. As the engagement unfolded, the voice of the bridge was flat, professional. Nobody cheered, nobody shouted. It was the quiet work of people who had come to do a job, and who did not particularly enjoy the job, but who were going to finish it. Target 1, Port Shipyard, hit. Target 2, Command Tower, hit. Target 3, Orbital Defense Platform, hit. One by one, 12 ships in dock. Nobody got out. Not one Kael'thar vessel escaped Vester that day. Not one distress signal made it past our jammers. The base went quiet under our fire, and then it went dark, and then it was gone. I did not see my first Kael'thar face until later. We took prisoners. That surprised me. I had assumed from the Admiral's speech that we would not, but Admiral Shaw was not what I thought she was. She was not simple. She took prisoners from Vester because she wanted to know things. She wanted to know the chain of command. She wanted to know who had ordered the Hippocrates attack and who had approved It and who had laughed about it. Afterwards, they brought me the first prisoner on a stretcher, Kael'thar body hard-shelled and pale, 2 wounds in the chest. He was fighting slowly, and he was awake. I stood over him for a long time. My hands did not shake. That is the thing I will remember. My hands did not shake. They had shaken for 3 weeks. They had shaken every time I had picked up a cup. They had shaken in the gymnasium doing push-ups, in the mess hall holding a fork, in the escape pod holding a child, but standing over the Kael'thar on the stretcher with the deck cold under my boots. My hands did not shake at all. I thought for one long second about walking away. Then I heard Margaret Hill's voice in my head, as clear as if she was standing next to me. "You are not God, you are a doctor. We take the ones we can take." I treated him. I did a good job. He lived. Later he told us names. The next strike was on a shipyard called Kesh, then a supply depot called Morna, then a forward command station called Irksba. We moved fast. We moved quietly. We arrived and we left in the quiet. Behind us said what Admiral Shaw had promised it would say. The Kael'thar Ascendancy called for an emergency Concord Council meeting on the 4th day. The Concord Council met. Every species was there. Every seat was occupied, except ours. Catherine Blake had not returned. No Terran representative came to the meeting. The Kael'thar ambassador, a 7FT warrior with a metal-covered chest, demanded mediation. He demanded arbitration. He demanded at one point a ceasefire. The Concord Council looked at the empty Terran seat, and the Concord Council did nothing because there was nothing the Concord Council could do. We were not their problem anymore. We had stopped being their problem the moment Catherine Blake walked out of the room. We were the Kael'thar's problem now. And the Kael'thar were discovering something about us they had not known. They had thought we were soft. We were not soft. We were warm. That is a different thing. A warm species will feed your children. If your children are hungry, a warm species will carry your wounded when your wounded cannot walk. A warm species will sit up all night at the bed of a fighting stranger and hold that stranger's hand so that the stranger does not go alone. A warm species does all of that because it loves. And if you do not understand what love is, you will make the mistake the Kael'thar made. You will think warmth is the same as weakness. You will think that because a thing is gentle, a thing is soft. You will think that because a thing kneels to tend a wound, a thing cannot stand up and close its fist. You will be wrong. The Vorth understood first. The Vorth are an old species, older than the Concord itself. They speak slowly because they have had a long time to think. Halfway through our campaign, the Vorth Elder Council issued a public statement that got read aloud on every news channel in the galaxy. I remember the line that mattered. We misunderstood the humans. They do not love because they are weak. They act because they love. Their fury is the other face of their tenderness. We should have studied their mothers before we counted their soldiers. I heard that statement in the mess hall of the Resolute. Around me 100 soldiers. And pilots and techs kept eating. Nobody looked up. Nobody smiled. We did not need the Vorth to tell us what we were. We knew what we were. We had always known. We had just forgotten for 100 years that the galaxy did not know. We were reminding it. On the 11th day, I went on my first boarding action. I will not tell you everything that happened on that ship. Some things are not for telling. I will tell you this. I was assigned to Peter Hart's squad as combat medic. We boarded a Kale Thar destroyer that had been disabled in the skirmish at Kesh. Our job was to secure the bridge, take prisoners, and extract intelligence. I was scared. I had never been on a boarding action. I had never carried a rifle into a real corridor. Peter Hart walked beside me through the airlock. He did not say much. He was not a man of many words, but as we moved into the Kale Thar hallway, he said, "Quietly stay behind me, Doctor. I will tell you when to move." I stayed behind him. The action took 40 minutes. We lost 2 of ours and took 23 prisoners. 11 of the prisoners were wounded. 4 were seriously wounded. I treated all 4. One of them was a captain, mid-ranking officer. He had been part of the chain of command that approved the Hippocrates attack. I treated him. When he woke up, he looked at the red cross patch on my sleeve and his face did something I will remember. It was not fear, it was not gratitude, it was confusion, pure, deep, bottomless confusion. "You are a healer," he said. His translator rendered it flat. "Yes." "You are here on this ship." "Yes." "You repaired my injury." "Yes." "Why?" I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Kessie. I thought about Iran. I thought about the Vorn boy on my table whom I had left behind. I said, "Because you are going to stand trial for what you did at the Hippocrates. You cannot stand trial if you are not breathing, so I am keeping you breathing. It is not a kindness." He closed his eyes. I went on to the next patient. The Kale Thar Ascendancy tried to surrender on the 19th day of the campaign. I was aboard the Resolute when the message came through. I was in the mess hall eating a bowl of soup. Admiral Shaw was 2 tables over, which I had learned was deliberate. She ate with the crew. She said it kept her honest. The communications officer came to her table and handed her a tablet. Admiral Shaw read it without changing her face. Then she handed the tablet back. "Reply as follows," she said. "You will surrender when we tell you to surrender. Not before." The communications officer blinked. "Ma'am." "Those words exactly. Send it." The officer left. Admiral Shaw went back to her soup. I watched her for a while. She did not look like a woman who hated anyone. She looked like a woman who had decided to do a thing and who was doing it. She had eaten with the crew of the Hippocrates once 2 years ago before it was destroyed. She had played chess with Captain Fry. She had told me once that she had liked him, that he had reminded her of her brother. She did not speak of any of that on the Resolute. She did not need to. The second surrender offer came on the 24th day, after we had hit 2 more shipyards and a research station that was producing weapons designed to punch through hospital-grade hull plating. That was what they had been making. Weapons specifically for use against unarmed ships. We took the research station apart very slowly so that the Kale Thar scientists inside had time to understand what they had built and what was coming for them. We took most of them alive, too. Admiral Shaw's answer to the second surrender offer was the same, word for word. The third surrender offer came on the 31st day, and this time it came from a name we knew, Warlord Krexful. He was the officer who had ordered the Hippocrates' attack, he had been on one of the cruisers that had done it. He was now aboard the Kael'thar flagship, the Dri Korath, which had become the last major vessel the Ascendancy had left. His offer was personal. He said he would surrender himself alone to Admiral Shaw if she would agree to leave the rest of the Kael'thar military intact. Admiral Shaw, I was told later, laughed. It was the only time anyone on the Resolute had heard her laugh. Her reply was short. Warlord Crexville, we are not here for you. We are here for all of you. You are not as important as you think you are. You will surrender when we tell you to. Surrender and not before. We took the Dri Korath 3 days later. That's where I met Crexville. The boarding action on the Dri Korath was the largest single engagement of the campaign, 11 boarding squads including mine. I was the combat medic as before. The ship fought back hard, they knew it. Was the last one, they knew what was coming. We took the bridge on the second hour. Crexville was there. He had refused to leave. He had decided, I think, that he would end on his bridge as his ancestors had ended on theirs. It would have been, for him, an honorable finish. We did not give him that. One of our squad members disabled his leg carefully, controlled not to finish, only to stop. He went down and Peter Hart put a boot on his weapon and Peter Hart looked at me. Dr. Peter Hart said, "Keep him breathing." I knelt down next to Crexville. I looked at the creature who had ordered the attack on the Hippocrates. He was bigger than I had expected, bigger than any Kael'thar I had treated. His shell was scarred from old battles. He had medals pinned through the shell itself, which was how Kael'thar of his rank wore their honors. One of the medals I saw bore the symbol of the Hippocrates engagement. They had given themselves a medal for it. He looked up at me. He did not speak. I worked on his leg for 40 minutes. I did a good job. I saved him. My hands did not shake at all. When I was finished, I stood up. I looked down at him. "You are not going to go today." "Warlord," I said, "that is not my gift. That is my demand." They carried him out. Admiral Shaw had him transferred, not to a holding frigate, but to the flagship itself. She gave him a cell with a window. The window looked out on the remains of his fleet. She kept him there for a long time. She made him watch. The Kael'thar Ascendancy offered unconditional surrender on the 38th day. This time we took it. Admiral Shaw met the Kael'thar Chief of Staff aboard a neutral conquered vessel. The terms were already written. They were not negotiable. Total demilitarization. Every Kael'thar warship handed over. Every shipyard dismantled. Every weapon factory converted to civilian production. Under conquered oversight. Reparations to the families of the Hippocrates dead, paid in perpetuity for 4 generations. Every officer in the chain of command that had authorized, planned, or carried out the Hippocrates attack would be surrendered to the conquered tribunal. No exceptions, no exemptions, not even Crexville's subordinates. The Kael'thar signed within a day. There was one condition we did not ask for, but that the Kael'thar themselves proposed. They asked to surrender their homeworld's defense grid. They expected, I think, that we would occupy them, that we would land soldiers on their cities, that we would do to them what they had done to us on a larger scale, and that the galaxy would watch them be humiliated. Admiral Shaw refused the offer. She told them through her own Translator the exact words. We do not want your homeworld, we do not want your cities, we do not want your children, we came for your soldiers, we got them, we are done with you. The Kelthar delegate did not understand. That was the look on his face as it was later broadcast. He did not understand. The Vorth watching did understand. The Vorth understood a great deal that day. So did the other old species of the conquered. They had watched a young, warm, emotional species wage a war of 38 days against a civilization 10 times its age, and they had watched that species win, and they had watched that species refuse to take the one prize every conqueror in galactic history had always taken. We did not want their homeworld, we did not want their cities, we did not want their children. We had come for the ones who struck our healers. We had taken them. We were done. The Vorth issued a second public statement 2 days later, shorter than the first. It said only this: the humans have taught us what we should have learned a long time ago. Kind species is not a gentle species. Kind species has chosen to be gentle. That choice is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Do not ever cause a kind species to unmake it. I heard that statement standing on the flight deck of the Resolute, watching a transport take Crexville away for his tribunal. He had not been permitted to end on his own terms. He had been permitted to live. He would face every surviving family member of every person who had been on the Hippocrates. They would testify one by one across a 3-month tribunal that the entire galaxy would watch. I was told later that I was listed as one of the testifying witnesses. I refused politely, firmly. I told the tribunal clerk, I have already done my speaking. My speaking was in the corridors of his ships. I have nothing to add. They accepted my refusal. On the 40th day of what the galaxy was now calling the Hippocrates War, the Terran fleet began its withdrawal from Kelthar space. No parades, no victory broadcasts, no ceremony. The unmarked ships that had arrived in silence left. In silence, they simply turned one by one and went home. I stood on the observation deck of the Resolute as we made our way back to Terran space. Peter Hart stood next to me. He had a bandage on his right hand from a wound he had taken on the Drikarath. He would keep the scar for the rest of his life. He would be proud of it. I knew looking at him that he would never boast of it to anyone. What now, doctor? He asked me. I did not answer him for a long time. I was thinking about Iran, about Kessie, about the Vorn boy I had left on the table, about the small, stubborn fact that I had gone to a war and I had treated the wounded on both sides, and I had come back and my hand still belonged to me and my oath still belonged to me, even if the oath and I were both older than we had been. Now, I said, I think I'm going to go back to medicine, Captain. He looked at me. He smiled for the first time since I had known him. It was a small smile, but it was a real one. I thought you might, he said. 6 months later, I was standing in the operating theater of the Hippocrates II, and my patient was a Kelthar boy. I will explain how we got there. The new ship was Margaret Hill's. She had fought to build it. She had fought harder to staff it. The Terran fleet had told her no at first. They had told her the galaxy was not ready for another neutral hospital vessel. Margaret had told the fleet that she did not care What the galaxy was ready for, she was going to build it, and then she had built it. The Hippocrates II was not like the first Hippocrates. That was the first thing you noticed about it. The first Hippocrates had flown unarmed and unescorted, protected only by the Dreven compact and the decency of strangers. The Hippocrates II flew with 2 Terran destroyers beside it at all times. Their names were the Resolute and the Vigil. Clear's throat. Peter Hart was the executive officer. Aboard the Vigil, he had left the boarding corps and taken command. Training. That was the new doctrine. No human flag healer would ever again fly unprotected. Not in conquered space, not anywhere. The doctrine had a name, the galaxy called it the Carter Protocols. I was not asked about the name, I was told about it. I did not like it, I still do not like it, but the Concord Council had voted unanimously, and the protocols stood under the Carter Protocols. An attack medical personnel of any species anywhere in conquered space was an attack on humanity. Humanity reserved the unilateral right to respond. No consultation, no delay, no arbitration. Nobody had tested the Carter Protocols. Nobody, as far as I could tell, was planning to. 8 species in the first 4 months after the Hippocrates War had asked for Terran escort ships to accompany their own medical convoys. We had provided them free of charge. The Vorth were among the first to ask, so were 3 of the species who had lost the most at the first Hippocrates. The galaxy had come to a strain understanding about us. We were not as they had once thought, the gentle species. We were not as they had briefly feared, the terrible species. We were, they had decided, the paradox species, the species that acted with terrifying precision and then went back to kneeling at the beds of strangers. Humanity had become, not in spite of the war but because of it, the galaxy's shield for the unarmed. I was chief surgeon of the Hippocrates II. Margaret was captain. She had taken a command rank to do it. She had not wanted the rank, but she had taken it because only a captain could command the ship, and only Margaret was going to command this ship. Our crew was 112 people. 43 species were represented among them. We had a Vorn nurse, a Drell lab tech, a Murring pharmacist. We had 2 humans from the first Hippocrates, myself and a pediatric nurse named Alice Moore, who had survived by hiding in a supply closet for 8 hours and who never spoke of it, not to me, not to anyone. We did not have any Cathar crew. Not yet. The boy came aboard on a quiet afternoon. In the 6th month, he had been hurt in a civilian industrial accident in the occupied Cathar home system. A loading crane had collapsed on his shoulder. The local Cathar hospital had not been able to save the arm. The regional Concord Oversight Office had requested a medical transfer to a higher capability vessel. The nearest higher capability vessel was the Hippocrates II. I was the one who read the request. Margaret came into my office while I was reading it. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You're called Daniel," she said. I read the file. The boy was 9 years old. His name was Ketvar. His father was a dock worker. His mother was a teacher. Neither of them had been military. Neither of them had any connection to the Hippocrates War. "Approve it," I said. Margaret nodded. She did not ask if I was sure. She did not need to ask. Half the crew did not speak to me for 2 days after the transfer arrived. That is a difficult thing to write, but it is true. They did not shout at me. They did not refuse orders. They simply did not speak to me when they did not have to. They went about their work. They passed me in the corridors with their eyes down. I understood. I did not hold it against them. Some of them had lost family members on the first Hippocrates. Some of them had read the names on the memorial wall every single morning since the ship had been commissioned. I was asking them to carry something heavy, and I was asking them to carry it in silence, and I could not promise any of them that it was worth carrying. But I had made the call. On the third day, I operated on Ketvar. I saved his arm. It took 11 hours. It was the hardest surgery I had done in 3 years. Ketvar physiology is difficult at the best of times, and pediatric Ketvar physiology is not something most human surgeons have ever seen. I had spent 2 weeks before the transfer studying the texts I had practiced on simulators. I had drilled my team. When we went into the operating theater, we knew exactly what we were doing. His parents were in the waiting area. They had been told through the translator that a human surgeon was going to operate on their son. They had not, I was told, spoken for the entire briefing. They had just listened. They had signed the consent form with shaking hands. They had been given water. They had been given blankets. They had waited. 11 hours later, I walked out of the operating theater, and I told them in the cleanest Ketvar dialect I could manage that their son was going to be fine. The mother wept. Her tears were clear like a human's. I had not known that. The father did not weep. He stood up. He put one claw-tipped hand on my shoulder. He held it there for a long moment. He did not speak. He did not need to. I understood him anyway. When Ketvar woke up, 2 days later, I was the one sitting next to the bed. That was my choice. I had told Margaret I wanted to be there when he woke. She had not argued. He opened his eyes. He saw me. He saw the red cross patch on my sleeve. He blinked twice slowly. His voice was small. He did not have his translator. He spoke in his own language, and I understood him in fragments. You, he said, human. Yes. You fix my arm. Yes. You are healer. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. I waited. He was 9 years old, and he was in a room on a ship that was not his. And he was looking at a man from a species that had, within his own short lifetime, disassembled his world's entire military and made his grandfather's generals stand trial in front of the galaxy. Then he asked me the question. He asked it so quietly, I almost did not catch it. We hurt your healers, he said. Why are you fixing me? I did not answer him right away. I sat there with him for a long minute. I looked at his small face. I looked at his bandaged arm. I looked at the window above his bed where the stars went past, the same stars that had gone past the windows of the first Hippocrates on the day it ended. I thought about what to tell him. I thought about what I wished someone had told me when I was 9 about the hard things of the world. Finally, I said to him in the cleanest words I could find, I am a healer. I was always a healer. That was never the question. The question was whether your people would remember that we were also something else. We reminded them. We reminded the whole galaxy. And now, because we reminded them, your people will never do To mind what they did to us again. That part is finished. He listened. His eyes did not leave my face. And now, I said, I am a healer again. Because being a healer is what I actually am. The other thing was only what I had to become for a little while because you made me become it. When I go home tonight, I go home as a healer. I go home as a man who fixed your arm. I do not go home as the other thing I left on your warlord's bridge, and I do not want it back. I did not know if he understood. His translator was still off. He was 9 years old. He had been taught his entire short life that humans were the enemy. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." He said it in my own language. He had learned the words somewhere from some teacher at some point. He had not used them before. He used them now. I cleaned up his bedside. I checked his monitors. I told him to sleep. I walked out of the recovery room, and I walked down the long curved corridor of the Hippocrates II, and I walked past the memorial wall with the 612 names on it, and I went to my quarters, and I sat down on the edge of my bunk, and I put my face in my hands, and I wept for the first time since the day Richard Fry had told us over the intercom that it was not a drill. I had not wept for them before, not once, not in the escape pod, not on the Compassion, not in the Concord chamber, not in the gymnasium or the mess hall of the Resolute, not when I had treated Crexville on his own bridge. I wept for them now. I wept for Kessie. I wept for Iran. I wept for the Vorn boy I had left on the table, and for the captain who had not raised his voice when he gave us the last order. I wept for Catherine Blake, who had spoken 4 words and had never been seen in public again. I wept for Admiral Shaw, who had lost her husband in a small war long before this big one, and who had told us that we were the answer to those who refused to give mercy, and who had been right, and who had not been happy about being right. I wept because I had saved a Cathar child, and because I had wanted to, and because wanting to was the thing that meant I was still who I had been before. I slept eventually. The next morning, I went back to work. Ketvar stayed aboard with us for 3 weeks. His parents stayed aboard during his recovery. Alice Moore, the pediatric nurse who had survived in the supply closet, was the one who spent the most time with him in the end. She did not speak of what had happened to her. She did not need to. She read to him. She taught him card games. When he left the ship on the transport back to his home world, he hugged her, and she hugged him back, and neither of them said anything because they did not need to. The galaxy noticed, of course the galaxy noticed, a picture of Alice Moore, and Ketvar made its way onto Concord news networks. There was some commentary. Most of it was the kind I did not want to read. But the Fourth Elder Council once again made a statement, their third and last, on the subject. The humans have completed their lesson. They have taught us what fury looks like. They have taught us what restraint looks like. They have now taught us what forgiveness looks like. We must now, as a galaxy, decide whether we are capable of learning all 3. I stood on the observation deck that night after I read the Fourth statement. Margaret came and stood next to me. She had a cup of tea in her hands, which she always did in the evening. She offered me a cup. I took it. We did not speak for a while. Then she said, "Daniel, do you know what the old species are calling us now?" "No. They are calling us the two-handed species." I thought about that. Because we heal with one hand and act with the other, I said. No, Margaret said, because we carry the blade and the scalpel in the same hand, because we do not put one down to pick up the other, because we were never two things, and they finally figured it out. I thought about Iran then. I thought about his wings spread wide in the corridor, unarmed, asking for mercy, because it was the only thing he knew how to ask for. I thought about him as a healer. I thought about what Admiral Shao had done to the people who took him from us. I thought about Ketvar and his arm and his thank you in my own language. Margaret was right. We had not been two things. We had only ever been one thing. And the galaxy had mistaken the gentleness for the whole of us, and we had for a little while shown them the rest. I raised my tea. Margaret raised hers. We did not toast anyone. We did not need to. In every era and among every species, healers have worn a mark of neutrality. We wear ours still. We wear it on our sleeves. We wear it on our ships. We wear it in the way our hands move when a stranger bleeds, no matter who stranger, no matter whose blood. But now behind that mark, the galaxy sees something else. They see the shape of what we were briefly when they forced our hand. They see the ships without flags and the cross turned upside down. Like a wound, they see Admiral Shao's quiet face, and they hear Catherine Blake's 4 words. They have seen once, they will not need to see it again. That is the end of what I will tell you. I am Daniel Carter, Chief Surgeon of the Hippocrates II, 41 years old, 16 years a healer before the war and all the years since. My hands still do not shake when I hold a scalpel. My oath still fits in my chest the way it always has, the way it always will. They struck our healers, we struck back with every ounce of what we had, and then when it was done, we went back to saving lives, theirs included. Especially theirs. That is the part they will never understand. That is the part that should frighten them most.